We are live. Check, check, check. Mark Ross, can anybody hear me on? And let's go. Let's roll the walk-in.
You're a thought criminal.
Welcome to the Motor Carrier Self-Defense, brought to you today by the Trucking Defense Network and Accident Plan and Ready Response. Here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate it a great deal. Rapid response equals rapid resolution, my friends, and our purpose is always to defend the industry that feeds our nation. If we are going to band together to solve this insurance crisis, the solution starts at home, and our motto is the best defense is self-defense. So the theme of our event today is called Big Brother is Watching You. And unless your name is Rip Van Winkle and you've just awakened from a 50-year slumber, you know that we are living in a digital world. And when it comes to trucking, between the telematics data on our vehicles and the browsing history and everything that's contained on our mobile devices, we leave behind us a digital breadcrumb trail everywhere we go. And of course, privacy in this digital world is not what it was back in our analog days. And George Orwell's 1949 novel titled 1984 has become eerily prescient, invoking such terms as thought police, thought crime, doublethink, and of course, Big Brother. And we're going to consider today not only Orwell's dystopian version of the concept, but let us also delve into the Big Brother depicted in the familial sense. The Wally Cleaver, the one who backs us up, the one who rights us when we turn aside. Because whether you like it or not, the technology is out there. It's here to stay, and the genie will not go back in the bottle. And so to help us understand the effect on motor carrier self-defense, we're privileged today to have two experts on tap. One of these experts will take us on a journey deep into the dark recesses of our mobile telephone. He'll help us understand what information is contained on the device, how they can go about getting it, and what it means in a post-accident trucking claim situation. Our second guest will help us to understand the real-world practical effects that this information inflicts upon our daily life in the larger supply chain picture. And so, please welcome a man who understands the inside of your telephone better than he understands his own children, from the nationally recognized Invista forensic firm. Please welcome Senior Principal Consultant, Mr. Larry Daniel. Larry, thank you. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me.
And representing the motor carrier perspective, let's welcome the Vice President of Myborg Trucking. He is a United States Marine and clearly one badass dude. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Jeff Carr. Jeff.
Thanks for having me, Brennan.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate your time today and your perspective on this. This is a very important discussion. So let's start off with Larry and let everybody know the context of this discussion. I was having a conversation with Larry recently, and he told me about a process that some enterprise level large motor carriers have begun where they collect a driver's personal cell phone in a post-accident situation. Now, there's a lot we don't know about this. We don't know under what circumstances they're collecting these cell phones, but it's starting to become a routine practice. And then they'll grab the driver's cell phone, buy them a brand new one, and send the cell phone to Larry for a digital forensic analysis. So, is this a proactive self-defense measure? Or is it a slippery slide down the privacy slope? So let's start with Larry. Larry, give us a brief overview of what you do and what it comes to litigation and post-accident claims.
Well, we have two questions there. So what we typically do, or what I do and what the other experts in my firm do, is we get the phone, we make a forensic image of it, excuse me, and we can analyze that using the same software that the FBI uses and all the other national police forces and local and state to extract data from a phone. So depending on the kind of phone and the level of support it has by cell right, we can get a great deal of information back from a phone. So that's part of it. That's kind of the technical end of it. The less technical end of it is, what are the carriers doing? When I first spoke at the Trucking Industry Defense Association several years ago, that issue came up. And as I was talking to some of the trucking companies and with their in-house counsel and some of their outside counsel, some of them have decided that the best thing that they can do is to get a driver's phone, company and or personal phone. But if it's a personal phone, they have to do something to give that guy his data back. So, because you don't want to take somebody's phone away from them and say, hey, give us your phone, and then we're not going to do anything to help you out. So my recommendation at the time was just take them down to the local store, whether it's whatever carrier it might be, and buy them a new phone and let the phone transfer the data to the new phone, and then give us the existing phone, turn it off and send it to us, and we can preserve it. That doesn't mean we have to analyze it, but at least at that point, it's preserved.
Aha.
So, because one of the things that happens, you may not be in litigation immediately. It may be a year before you see litigation. And then you get into claims where a plaintiff attorney is going to say, well, you didn't preserve the phone, and you should have, because there was an accident and you should have expected litigation. And so they'll claim spoliation, or they'll claim some other nefarious thing. But at the end of the day, if you are just want to find out what's really going on with that guy's phone at some point in the future, you can do it. Go ahead.
So the routine aspect is really a matter of preservation more than anything else. Is that correct? So you preserve the data and you don't necessarily analyze it. Is that correct?
That's correct, because you may preserve the data and you may never see litigation. But at least in my mind, as a technical expert, I want the best evidence I can get at closest to the time that the evidence is relevant. And the reason for that is because depending on the kind of phone, very critical data kind of expires on the phone after 30 days. So you want to make sure that if you get the phone within that 30-day window, then a lot of the user interaction data that's going to be critical to maybe a case is going to be present on that phone. Because, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I want to let Jeff come in here, because we're going to get back to that, because there's a big difference between preservation and analysis, and that's going to make a difference. So,
Absolutely.
Jeff Carr, please give us a brief overview of your role at MyBorg. Tell us about MyBorg, sort of the size and scope of what you do. I know you're a wildly successful trucking company. You've made some of the best lists in the U.S. So tell us about that. Tell us about MyBorg, and then tell us whether this is a practice that you're currently working with.
Sure. So MyBorg Brothers is this is actually our 40th year. This year, started by the current owner's father. So we're second generation trucking company. 200 trucks, a little more than 500 trailers right now. Got another 50 trucks on order. We do 48 states, 49 states, because we also go to Alaska about once a month as well. So we do truck all over the United States. We've got just about 500,000 square foot of warehousing here in the Rockford, Illinois area. We've also got a full service brokerage. We've got a 24/7 shop. We've got heavy duty wrecker and service trucks in the whole 9 yards. So that's kind of the size and scope of what we do here. I'm the
lot of iron.
It's a lot. It's a lot of moving parts. So I am the vice president of the MyBorg companies. So I am the number 2 over our organization as a whole. So yeah, that's my role. I've been in the industry about 15 years now. Started as a dispatcher, worked my way up through the safety and compliance chain, and then worked for some insurance brokers for a while doing risk management stuff. Then got back in the trucking side because once it's in your blood, it's hard to get out of. So. But yeah, this is not a practice that we're currently doing. It's something that I Brendan, when you and I had discussed this several weeks ago, is the first time I'd actually heard of it. So it also piqued my curiosity, to see what exactly you analyze, how you analyze, and what data you get there. So, yeah.
Well, and then Larry mentioned that the first step is preservation and the second is analysis. And of course, we believe in 2 concepts here at Accident Plan. That is, as you know, rapid response leads to rapid resolution. And when you control the narrative, you control the claim. And so, Larry, back to you. If I'm a motor carrier, I've had clearly a BI accident, maybe a severity level 2 or maybe even a level 3 situation. And you've collected the data on the phone and you haven't looked at it yet. If we're preparing for litigation and everything we do in level 2 or 3 should be in preparation for litigation, right? So we're preserving evidence to avoid issues of spoliation. At what point do you determine when you're going to analyze that data?
Well, I wouldn't make that determination. That would be made by the counsel for the trucking company. So, for instance, let's say that they have litigation and there are accusations that the driver was distracted, which is a very common accusation. Actually, probably 100% of the cases now, it's like, well, distracted, right? And this is on both sides, not just on the defendant's side, but also on the plaintiff's side. So to give you an example, the kind of things that we can discover from analyzing a phone, if you get it within the right time period, then if it's an iPhone, I can tell every time you touch the screen. I can tell when you take the phone and you have it in this orientation and you turn it to this orientation, it records that. When I unlock the phone, put in my passcode, it records that. When I plug it into CarPlay, it records that. When it hooks up to Bluetooth, it gives me a timestamp for that. If I'm on the App Store looking at an application, it tells me that. So, or if I'm in the Google Play Store looking for something. So it's a tremendous amount of data that's available to determine what's really going on with the phone. And we've had some crazy situations, but it helps to get to know what you're really dealing with. So now I'm going to tell you that and the trucking companies that I've dealt with, they just want to get to the truth of the matter and deal with it. So, they're not trying to play hide the ball or anything. So if they ask me to analyze the phone and I got something bad to tell that counsel, it's up to the council to figure out what to do with that information, not me. But my understanding that from most of the council I've talked to, they just want to know because they're not trying to shirk responsibility or anything. They're just trying to get to the truth of the matter as best that can be determined. And then the other part is getting the plaintiff's phone. So if you can get the plaintiff's phone and determine if they were distracted, depending on the circumstances of an accident, let's say that they pulled into the path of your truck or they changed lanes suddenly or something like that, and you can determine that they're distracted, that can be helpful to your case. So these phones record a tremendous amount of user activity and user actions. But it's like anything else, with cell phones especially, it's time is of the essence. So the longer a phone is used from the time that you care about, the less data you're going to recover that is relevant to that particular time frame. So you really want to get it as quickly as you can to make sure that you have gotten what you can get and that you can build your story around it.
And we can also presume from a legal perspective, and by the way, I'm not a lawyer, although I do wear a jacket. If you don't preserve that data and opposing counsel wants it later and you don't have it, you can expect a charge of spoliation. Does that seem reasonable, Larry?
Well, what I tend to see in these cases, and it comes from both sides, both directions. So if for some reason a phone is not preserved, you're going to see an affidavit from an expert like myself saying, hey, if the phone had been preserved, this is all the things we could have found on that phone potentially. Right. Versus not preserving the phone, and now we can't get any of that data that may have actually been the conclusionary evidence in this case. So, and that happens all the time. So you're going to see, notwithstanding experts who say stuff that isn't really actually true, not because they're trying to be mean, just because they don't understand. But it's very important to have a good analysis of your data, and also to be able to hold off or preclude getting those affidavits or declarations from the other side and their experts saying things about what they could or could not have done.
So there's also a cost containment effort going on, is what it sounds like. Jeff Carr, what's your perspective on this practice now that Larry's had a chance to give you a little more insight into it?
Well, so from a let's resolve an accident as quickly as possible. I think that we all agree there that excuse me, that when an accident occurs, you want to come out, you want to figure out how it happened, and who's at fault. Or who's liable as quickly as possible, because the quicker you resolve a claim, the cheaper that claim is going to be in theory. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I don't necessarily disagree with taking a driver's cell phone, but my concerns there would be, not only from a privacy standpoint, but, from a personal standpoint. I mean, you're taking someone's livelihood, and yes, you're giving them another phone. But is that giving them another phone just more enticing for them to say, yes, take my phone and see what's on it? If they have, if that, does that tamper it at all? The questions that I have are, what happens when you find something that, shouldn't be on their phone, whether it be, say you've got a company policy around moonlighting and you find that they've got a side job, what happens with that information? Or what happens if they have something illegal on their phone? What happens with that data? And how does that all work? Because you've got so many different pieces there on that privacy slope that are concerning.
Larry, now I know your wheelhouse is all about the technology aspect of it, but do you have a response to Jeff? I'm very curious. What happens? You find, Jeff indicated the moonlighting concern, but what if you find other criminal stuff, child porn? What have you ever run across things like that are not relevant to the facts at hand, but may wind up being disclosed or discovered?
Well, that's two interesting points. One is when the driver gives up their phone, I think you should be able to give them something stating that you will protect their privacy. So me having the phone doesn't mean that you get to see everything on it. It should mean that you get to see what's relevant to the time frame. Plus, even that can be restricted to only transactional data. And that's the way I usually try to frame it, especially when you're trying to get the other side's phone data. Because the role of an expert, because we're a third party, should be to protect that person's privacy so that you get what you need within the bounds of what both sides agree to, and that person's privacy is protected because maybe that person is a part-time pastor. Well, all of that information is protected. So you would have to always treat it that way. As far as criminality, oddly enough, the only thing that I'm aware of after 20 years of doing criminal work that you actually have to report as a crime would be child pornography. Anything else that you find on the phone that's not a crime, you're not legal. By law, we're not required to report, is my understanding.
I see. So it sounds like you've got a lot between you and the motor carrier. You've got some paperwork to do, and you've got some responsibilities yourself as a forensic analysis. Is that accurate, Larry? Because, because that is what that is. Did I understand you said you have a responsibility to protect the data that's not relevant? Is that how I understand that?
Yeah, I consider that an ethical responsibility. It's not necessarily a legal responsibility. So when you take somebody's phone, I think you should be able to assure them that you're not going to go through their phone looking for things of any kind. So, because when you have to give up a phone to the other side through a subpoena or a court demand or whatever, you would expect that their expert is not going to go through that phone and give the opposing counsel information that they shouldn't have or don't need, like the drinking habits or parties or anything like that from 2 months ago, because it's not relevant. So it should be a matter of you providing to the driver an assurance, the same way you would have to provide to the other side an assurance that you're not going to violate that person's privacy. And that's going to be the responsibility of the expert, not to give you data you're not supposed to have. And as long as you create parameters that you can agree to, let's say any data that within 5 minutes before or a half hour before the accident, plus only that data being transactional, so you don't get the pictures or content of text messages, just that a text message was sent or received. That's the kind of data that we try to push people to agree to without giving content, because content does get into privacy pretty heavy.
No, really, I promise. Protect it.
Right. Well, let me ask you this question. So, drivers like to put, suction cup mounts on their windshield and do, record themselves driving down the road, outward facing, much like a drive cam, right? So sure. 5 minutes before the collision, driver touches his screen and turns that on, and immediately before the collision, he touches his screen and he turns it off. How are you proving that, the phone wasn't in his hand, that he was actually operating in a, hands-free manner, so to speak? I mean, so I think that's another question that you have to ask is, how do you interpret the data as well?
Well, I mean, touching the phone's not hands-free in my opinion. So it's like you're still touching the phone.
So it is, because if you can touch it with one finger and it's not in your hand, I mean, that was the rule.
Well,
that's why I'm not an attorney and don't claim to be one.
Right.
Well, and from a safety and risk management perspective, we could have a completely different conversation about what drivers do with their phones on social media when they're driving. I'm not saying it's right, and I'm not saying that we approve of it. Right, but still, Larry, go ahead and answer Jeff's question.
Well, I mean, in many cases, if we saw that kind of activity on the phone, we can tell what they did, if they touched the screen or not. So we may not be, and if they're doing video recording, while they're driving down the highway and they stop that recording, we should be able to tell what time they stopped the recording, and that they did have to touch the screen to stop it. Now, whether or not the phone was in their hand or mounted to the windshield, we can't tell that from simply the data that's going to be on the phone. Of course, you could tell it from reviewing the video where the phone was.
Right. Well, and I guess that goes back to the analysis and what exactly you analyze then at that point. But, I guess my question is, you get an inordinate amount of data by taking someone's device, and you're analyzing a portion of it. How is it being interpreted? Is that something that you guys are doing as well? In my personal opinion or my professional opinion, I analyze this data, or are you just pulling the data and sending it and saying, here's your data?
No, because if you don't have an expert to analyze the data, most of the time you wouldn't understand what you get. So we have to pull data not only from what the program can automatically parse, but in many cases we're pulling data out of databases within the phone. And the database entries don't necessarily make sense to non-nerds. So if you're not trained in how phones store information and what you're actually looking at, it's very easy to misinterpret data from a phone. So we're not going to just send you a report that says, well, here's what it was, without some interpretation, because that would just be not very helpful, quite frankly.
It wouldn't be. It wouldn't be, because that's how we control the narrative. Jeff, can you imagine a scenario in your situation where you might enact this practice?
I think that it's a practice that, well, let me say this. I think that in severe losses, I can think of one from 2 years ago that was an unfortunate triple fatality. In something like that, where it's going to you just know it's going to go to litigation. I think that might be a potential situation where you say, you know what, I think I might want to record this or preserve this data just in case. I think your policy has to be very carefully crafted to protect not only the employee but also the company as well. So I think that there are very specific situations where this would be a practice. But again, it would have to be very, very carefully crafted.
Yeah, and that was my follow-up question for you, Jeff, is how do you as a leader and mentor to your people, how do you go about convincing the driver to give it up? I mean, and is Larry's ethical promise going to hold water in that?
Well, mine is.
Larry,
okay, but Larry, you've never met this guy, and I go up to the driver. I'm Jeff Carr. I go to the driver. I say, listen, this is a bad situation. We need to know what's on your phone. And I promise you that my buddy Larry he's only going to tell us what we need to see. He's not going to show you anything else. How does that conversation go in your shop, Jeff?
Well, I think that conversation goes, that due to the severity of this event, we need to preserve your cell phone. I think that you also start that conversation and say, look, they're going to analyze your phone. If there's anything on there that shouldn't be, or there's anything that we need to know right now, we need to have that conversation. So I think that's how you preface it. It's not an admission of fault or guilt. Look, we're just trying to get to the bottom of this, and any information that you're willing to provide is more than helpful. I think as you present it that way, as opposed to, hey, give me your cell phone, I need it, I think you're a little bit more prone to get it. And then also explain, look, I'm giving you a phone in return. I need to preserve yours because of X, Y, and Z. You'll find that, and I'm sure that Brendan, but when drivers are in traumatic collisions, they're kind of shell shocked and will do whatever you ask them to do because they're not thinking. And that's a good thing, though. As a motor carrier, You get those guys that you don't want them to think, because then they do something that could be and have a negative impact on it. You just want them to say, hey, listen to me. This is what I need you to do. And 99% of the time, they're going to do it because they don't know what else to do. They don't know how to handle that situation. They've never been in it. You kind of have to be that crisis manager. So.
Yeah, they're frightened. They're clearly frightened. They're frightened of the implications. They're frightened of what could show up criminally. They're frightened about they've got their name on a lawsuit because they're usually named personally as the driver, and it is a field that they're not familiar with, that they're not comfortable operating in. So I imagine that probably helps. But what you have effectively done, Jeff, is started to shift that, and that's what the purpose of this conversation is to shift it from the Orwellian Big Brother to the Wally Cleaver, and that's where you become the good Big Brother, right?
It's and, just like anything else in trucking, especially when you work in the office and you've got a great team of people like we do here. Everything is a coachable moment to these individuals. One of our core values here is empathy, right? By communicating well, we listen and understand the needs of our customers, employees, and vendors. It's one of our core values, right? But
I love it.
But for us, it's about, hey, this is why we need to do this. Explaining that to an individual as opposed to just saying that you need to do it will get you a lot further. And that's how we are with all of our policies. And I'm sure a lot of other companies are the same way. But, if you can not only calm them down, explain the situation, they're more apt to listen to you and really take it and say, okay, I understand why you need it. Hey, look, I have X, Y, and Z. Hey, just so you know, I've got a side job, or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And if you've got a great group of people, it's not a hard conversation to have as long as you have it right.
Yeah, that's what comes from our friend John Farquhar, who is an outstanding risk manager. You want them to understand that it may help defender exonerate them, because that's something a driver doesn't, in my perspective, a driver doesn't understand when they go to work, when they get in their truck, they don't necessarily understand how exposed they are. Many a truck driver has wound up in jail in the middle of their shift, and I promise you they were not expecting that.
Well, and transversely, look at it the other way. Hey, I'm a driver. I made a mistake. I was texting or doing whatever. If you can spin it that way, well, then it's, instead of we're dragging this out for 3 years because you're lying through your teeth about it, trying to defend your honor. It's, hey, I screwed up. Let's get this closed quickly and quietly, and let's move on with our lives. And I think that's the other side of that conversation, when it is something that, look, you as a motor carrier cannot defend. Hey, look, we had a driver that decided that that he made a bad decision. Here's the evidence. Let's just move on. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the accountability aspect of it for sure, and that is the strategy, right? When you find yourself adverse in a claim, is to get out as quickly and efficiently as possible. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, very good. What does the HR department have to say about this, Jeff?
Well, I think that's the other concern there is from an HR standpoint, because Larry is analyzing data. He gives his findings to the attorney provided by our insurance provider, and they say, hey, look, this is the information we found. Oh, by the way, he found this in his data, that he was violating your corporate policy on whatever, whether it be recording the video while driving down the road, or it's he was texting about a side job when 2 minutes before the accident happened, or whatever that case may be. Now as an employer, do we terminate? Do we not terminate? If we terminate, are we subject to wrongful termination because of information provided? Or is it, hey, you provided us your cell phone, but we coerced you to provide us your cell phone because we told you if you gave us your phone, which is 3 years old and outdated, that you're going to get a brand new phone, right? So there's a lot of questions there, and how do you address those? And I don't necessarily think there are answers out there. And so that's kind of the big question mark when it comes to this. You can be as understanding and you can and as empathetic as possible in the beginning, but what happens when that bad data comes out, and how does your HR department handle it is a big question, because your policies surrounding this isn't going to address, hey, if we find data that says you were violating company policy, we're going to terminate you, but your company policies say that, hey, if you violate a company policy, you're going to be terminated. So, there's really no answer to it that's kind of a one size fits all. And in our organization, I think that the question or the answer to that is, well, if you told us about it beforehand so that we understood, you're taking accountability, and that holds a lot of water in our eyes. But if you didn't tell us about it and you just provided the phone and we found this information, well, that's another side of that coin.
So part of that conversation has to be, hey, listen, here's what's going to come up.
Right.
In litigation, and you're going to wind up in a deposition, and there's going to be lawyers grilling you, and there's not going to be any stones unturned. These lawyers are going to overturn everything. So how about you tell me what's on that phone before we send it to Larry?
Absolutely. And I think that's part of that front end conversation, because you could have a driver of, let's say, questionable character. And what I mean by that is he may have had some bumps and bruises in his past life, but he's cleaned up his act and he's on the straight and narrow. Well, that's going to come out in litigation, right? Well,
right.
Now you couple that with, and let me back up for a second. And that particular driver, there is some defensibility there, right? Well, now you couple that with data on their phone that says that they were doing something inappropriate, or there was inappropriate data that some unethical data analyzer or technical expert brings up. Well, now that makes it even harder to defend, because you've got, not only does he have a questionable past, but we also found X, Y, and Z on his cell phone.
Well, and that's what puzzled me about Larry's ethical perspective on that is, yes, I know Larry, I trust Larry, but he's not the only analyst involved. He's not the only forensic expert there. And in the age of reptile theory,
especially on a plaintiff side, the facts of the case are not necessarily relevant. And so, because when we're doing this, we're demonstrating that the motor carrier is an evil monster and must be punished, and we're going to use any evidence we can, any basic rule that you didn't. Well, you had log violations 3 months ago. Well, anything that happened in the past is liable to come up and influence that. So, Larry Daniel, knowing who you are and knowing who else is out there. Mm-hmm. How do you recommend we deal with these non-relevant things that may be there? We talked a little bit about child pornography, but what about some other things?
Well, the main thing is that, first of all, if an expert analyzes a phone and it gets to your HR department, I think that's a problem, because whatever you should instruct your expert to do should be the same thing that you would expect the other side to see. So everything you're going to do, I think, should be covered by a very tight protective agreement or protective order that says, hey, the experts are allowed to extract this data and go through it because that's what they have to do. And you can't extract part of a phone. You have to get it all. So they're bound by this order or this agreement, and you can do this agreement with your experts and make sure the other side also has to agree to it. That says, you can only have this much amount of data provided to you from the phones, and it should be 15 minutes before the accident, and it should be transactional only with no contact. That way, nobody's privacy is violated, and it protects the driver not only from his privacy being violated from whatever reason, it also protects his privacy from being violated from the standpoint of you and your HR department seeing that he's got a side job. That may or not be a policy issue, and I'm not an attorney, I'm not an HR person, but I deal with these privacy issues constantly, day in and day out. And my recommendation is always that you have an agreement. And the other part, and you guys have talked about it some, but if the driver is warned beforehand, and I don't mean an hour before the accident, but in general, that says, hey, if you're in a major motor vehicle accident and there are serious bodily injuries, expect us to come and ask for your phone. And as a courtesy, we will get you a new phone because we don't want you to be without, and we'll get your data transferred to it. But we're going to have to come get it, and maybe that's your company policy that you ask for any communication device inside the cab of that truck. That's not me to make that determination. But if the guy knows in advance that that's going to occur, it's not a shocker, and it's not necessarily coercion, I don't think.
So, Jeff Carr, is there any data in your employment policy? I mean, is there any reference to that? Because that would be one way to solve the problem. Is as a part of the orientation process, you're going to sign all this paperwork anyway. Could you sign part of that employee handbook? Would be, in the event of an accident, we may need your personal data.
I mean, we could certainly put something like that in there. Absolutely. Again, my concerns around that are, and again, I'm not an attorney. Larry's not an attorney, but you look at, Larry or data analyst Smith, whoever has a bunch of data. They give that data to the attorney, the defense counsel, and that defense counsel is going to provide that information, whatever information he has, to the defendant under attorney-client privilege. So
sure,
we're not going to share that data, but if you come across something that violates a company policy, you'd be remiss not to do something about it. Because then you're not upholding your own standards. So you're again back down that slippery slope. But with regards to policy, I think that, if you've got a cell phone policy, which every company should, if you don't, you might want to reach out to someone and ask to, or have your safety department put one together. But in that cell phone policy, you could add that in there. In the event of a collision, we are going to ask for this. Then the concern becomes, if the driver knows he was doing something wrong, is he going to immediately destroy his phone and say it was destroyed in the crash? Because I've seen that in a past life where a driver had a dash cam and he was, in a bad way and, got in an accident and pulled the video card out of the camera and said, oh, it's corrupt. Right. Well, now that's, making it even worse because it looks like spoliation. Right.
It is spoliation.
Right. Is the same thing going to happen to a cell phone? Because you can't prove that it wasn't destroyed in the crash, but you can't prove that it was destroyed in the crash.
Yeah, but at least you know where you stand with the claim.
Right. And that brings up another question another question for Larry. What if the phone is destroyed in the accident? Can you still retrieve data off of it?
In many cases we can. I've had phones that were completely burned up in accidents that we were able to get the data from. Depends again on the make and model of the phone, the operating system version, and whether or not we know the passcode. So with modern phones, getting past passcodes is very difficult, whereas older phones, it wasn't even a problem. But if the phone is thrown in a bucket of water or run over by a truck or burned up, that doesn't mean that we can't get the memory chips off that phone and pull that data out of that phone by it's called chip off, by putting that chip into an exemplar phone and then extracting the data. And sometimes it requires, resoldering the chips or whatever, but we have labs that can do that.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago after the mass shooting out in Southern California, the FBI actually had the shooter's phones, but they couldn't get into them, and it took them months and months to get into them. Very good. So let me ask you this, Jeff, are you using cameras?
We have outward-facing cameras in all of our units. We do not do inward-facing because we respect our drivers and their privacy. But we we hire professionals. We expect them to be professionals, right? We use outward facing. They have saved us in some cases. They have hurt us in some cases, but we knew the answer right away.
That's the object, is to get to the bottom right away. And that was 2 points I was coming to. Is number one, is it possible to preempt this kind of practice with driver facing cameras? If you can see that the driver was or was not distracted at the time of the crash, then perhaps you don't need to go down this road.
Well, but my argument there is you can do that with other data. For example, all of our trucks have the Bendix Wingman fusion system. It's got it's got collision mitigation braking, right? It has object detection, all of those things. So if a driver is driving down the road and something happens in front of him and that truck reacts before he does, then there's a likelihood that something was going on that shouldn't have been going on, and that warrants further discussion, right? Because I have example videos that show and I actually posted one on LinkedIn a while back that actually I also can do an overlay that shows the throttle, shows the braking, shows when the truck intervenes. So I think that kind of prevents us from having to, or feeling like we're obligated to put a driver-facing camera in there. And yes, some drivers do complain incessantly about it because it is a computer and it beeps at them and everything else. But, ultimately it helps. In our cases, we estimated that it saved us, countless rear end collisions. Just from that alone, because you've got that collision mitigation braking, you have the adaptive cruise, you've got the, hey, it's beeping at you because you're wandering around in your lane. Or you're going too fast around a corner. It sends us all that. We review it. We counsel the drivers. So you have all of those tools. So you don't necessarily need to be Big Brother. With regards to, well, hey, we're all treated like adults, and that's how we look at it. You're a professional. We expect you to be a professional. Because that's who we are.
We have the fiduciary obligation to protect our business.
Absolutely.
And protect the motoring public at the same time. And let's not. And in all of this talk of defense, we must not lose sight of that.
But I also think that some people may have the right, or I certainly understand. Let me put it this way. I certainly understand that when you put a driver behind the wheel of a piece of equipment that's $250,000, that has $250,000 worth of cargo in it, and is rolling down the highway at 70 miles an hour, it's essentially an 80,000-pound rocket.
Of course.
So some people want to protect that and say, hey, we're going to put driver-facing cameras in, and we certainly understand that.
All right, this is our devil's advocate. I know this man, but I'm not going to mention him by name because he's got some conspiracy theories of his own. But one of our viewers asked, Jeff, do you think any of your current drivers would voluntarily surrender their phone to you?
Unequivocally,
and I agree with that. Now,
but it's because. Again, you go back to, and this is a conversation Brennan and I had before we went live, you treat your folks with respect. They will bend over backwards for you. We will give the shirt off our back to our drivers, and they'll do the same for us. And that's how we're confident in that. If I went to a driver that was in a severe collision and said, hey, I need your cell phone because I need to further protect you or us, they're going to provide it to us. And if they're not, well, that's a different conversation. But I'm confident in our driver pool to say, yes, they would.
I believe you. And were I in your driver pool, I most certainly would, because, we trust each other. And that's really where the empathy comes in, is because it nurtures trust.
Right.
Very good. Excellent. We're getting close here. Larry, what do you have for our audience? What is something that our motor carriers need to know that they don't already know that's going to come out of your shop? I know Invista is a large shop. You do a lot of forensics. You do vehicle forensics. You do reconstruction, all of those things. What do you need our audience to understand about your work that they don't already?
Well, I would just give you some cautions about dealing with motor vehicle accidents involving anything with telephones. And the reason I say that, it's not just a physical device, because even if that isn't present, somebody's going to request those phone records, right? And depending on the kind of phone records you can get, and it doesn't matter if it's a pay-as-you-go phone or what they call a prepaid phone, they still generate phone records. So the issue you run into is that you have some, I almost call them predatory experts because they only do plaintiff work, but they're going to come in and say, well, we're going to have 6 months of your driver's phone records and 6 months of his driver log. So we want to do this big database analysis to determine their lifestyle and how often they're distracted, which to me is, I think that's a little excessive and really isn't relevant to what may have happened in a few minutes prior to an accident, because it doesn't say anything about whether or not the driver's actually distracted. The second thing is that cell phone data in itself, when you look at it in a very raw form, which is the way we would look at it using our cell phone forensics software, and then subsequently in more deep dive analysis, is not something that comes out in a way that's easy to read. You can have somebody push out a timeline report for you, which you may or may not understand because of the way that the software formats it, and some of the ways that different things are formatted, like dates and times. And then finally, phone records themselves, which show up in nearly every motor vehicle accident case I work on, can be very confusing because there's no universal format. Each carrier formats their records in different ways. And then the time stamps in those records are different by carrier and by circumstances. And then when you look at, for instance, a raw record from AT&T, you can have a single record or a single phone call, for instance, take up 6 lines in that record. And I've had experts misinterpret that as multiple phone calls when in reality it's the same phone call. So having the expertise to actually read the records properly and interpret them correctly, read the phone data and interpret it correctly, and having experts that you can rely upon to be ethical, I think is very important. The other part is coming out of our shops, we also do in-vehicle forensics, where we can do extractions from the infotainment systems. We have accident reconstructionists who can do black box downloads and all the information that goes along with that. And of course, we have fire experts who can do analysis in vehicle fires. So we're a very complete forensic shop. We have almost 500 experts and a lot of different specialties. Almost all of our engineers are PEs. So we have lots of engineers that work for us as well. So I think that it's like anything else. I mean, we're in a litigious society. Trucking companies are easy targets because, people always perceive them to have deep pockets. And I think that, I've had all kinds of cases involving motor vehicles, everything from criminal cases up through and including, standard litigation cases involving everything from a combination of in and out vehicle cameras, along with vehicle records and phones, where it's determined that, the distraction may or may not have been caused by the phone. So even in cases I have where they have an interior camera and it looks like the driver's distracted, there's always the question is he distracted by the phone or is he just looking away from the camera? So that's a question. Those are all things that come up.
That is a question, and I have to tell you both, I am not entirely satisfied that non-relevant information would not be adverse to any claim, because that is the basic principle of the reptile theory, is to take the non-relevant information and make it relevant. Or make a jury believe that it's relevant. So I'm not. I know I do trust Larry's ethics. I just don't necessarily trust that entire process to come up with only what you ask for. So if Jeff's lawyer were to send his phone, and I do mean your lawyer, not you, your lawyer sends the phone to Larry and says, Larry, tell me whether this driver was distracted at the time of the accident. Larry's going to be able to come back and say yes or no.
That's correct.
But once you do that, you know, you're going to protect it under privilege as long as you can, maybe through the end of it. We don't know, because I've never had a straight answer from any lawyer on privilege. But you know, but where is that going to jump up and bite us later on? I'd call it a bouncing Betty. Jeff Carr, have you seen cell phone forensics come up in any claims that you have been involved with?
No, and not that I'm aware of. You know, the most recent one didn't request it. They asked for any telematic data, any GPS data, but nothing regarding the phone information specifically.
Okay. Is there any part of this conversation that is going to cause you to reconsider your position on cell phone analytics?
I certainly think it's something that I will discuss with my team to say, is this in our best interest? Is it something we should do? And if so, what does that policy look like? Because again, I'm not necessarily against it. But I think that it's a very, very slippery slope, and you need to be able to adequately protect yourself as an organization from the good and the bad that can come out of this.
Very good. We have this comment again from our friends at Payne Trucking. He says, defining a professional and well-qualified driver would be a great topic for another session. Yes, it would, Chris, and we will do that. But I'm inviting Mr. Carr to come back and talk to us not only about how to create and nurture and groom well-qualified drivers, but how to keep them in your seat. And so if I'm going to invite Jeff Carr to do that, we are going to bring that up on a different episode. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us here on Motor Carrier Self-Defense. I think we have enlightened our audience considerably. I appreciate your perspective. And so thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great afternoon and safe travels, everybody. And